We'll get back to the breaking news on that plane crash in the French Alps. Much more information coming in right now, horrendous information. But there's other news that's breaking right now, just coming into CNN, including this disturbing development. A United States Army National Guard soldier and his cousin now face charges of conspiring to provide material support to the terrorist group ISIS. Federal prosecutors say both men were arrested yesterday. Our justice reporter Evan Perez is joining us with the latest. This is very disturbing information. Tell us what we know.
Well, Wolf, this is very, very disturbing. Hassan Edmonds is a 22-year-old specialist with the Army National Guard. He was arrested at Midway Airport as he was trying to get on a flight to go to Cairo and eventually to try to fight in Syria. Apparently, he knows that the government is looking for people who are trying to go through Turkey to try to get to Syria, so he decided he was going to try this route. Instead, his cousin, Jonas Edmonds, 29 years old, is also charged in this case, and according to the Justice Department, what he's accused of doing, he was planning that once his cousin left the country, that he was going to use his army uniform to try to attack a U.S. military facility in Illinois.
How did this guy get on the FBI, the investigators' radar?
Well, it looks like what happened is that the FBI noticed that there were some postings online. So an FBI undercover agent contacted Hassan Edmonds and decided to start a conversation over which a period of several months they described plots to try to go join ISIS and do essentially to try to carry out attacks both here, inspired by what they saw happen in Paris, by the way, and also carry out, try to join ISIS to try to carry out attacks there. I should note that in the last 18 months, Wolf, the National Security Division at the Justice Department has prosecuted or is prosecuting, in the process of prosecuting 32 people for traveling or trying to provide some kind of assistance to terrorist groups. 18 of those have involved ISIS.
And the accusation in this particular case, an Army reservist, he was going to use his military background experience to try to fight, to try to help ISIS in the battle against the United States.
Right, exactly. And that's a disturbing allegation here.
It certainly is. All right, stand by. We're going to get more. The chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, Mike McCall, we're going to get his reaction to what is going on, as well as the dramatic escalation and now a full-scale war that's unfolding in Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and other Arab countries. They are now invading. They're moving in. They're fighting proxies backed by Iran. This is an escalating and very dangerous situation.
Mr. President, welcome to the program. John Stewart.
Archbishop Justin Welby.
Welcome. Grayson Perry, good to see you.
I love this idea that Britain was this big enveloping quilt that you could wrap yourself up in.
I'm sure you must be their first cycling president. You were trying to show the absurdity of these preconceived notions. What do you want people to take away?
This type of authoritarian regime is unsustainable.
When the anti-Balakas came to your village, what did you do?
We wanted to try and negotiate. They wouldn't listen to us.
What are you telling the parents now? Because they say, we saw our children alive and we want to get them back alive. Holy Father, you played a key role in establishing the Global Freedom Network. What exactly motivated your passion?
Human slavery is a crime against humanity.
Many of our institutions are busy apologizing for sexual abuse of children.
The church has to get it right.
Amanpour, tonight on CNN. It's called the Great Firewall.
Exactly what is not permitted online in China?
One thing that's accepted 1 month, next month it's a taboo subject.
This month on China, internet censorship.
The ambiguity is by design, not by accident.
Why does Beijing keep such a tight grip on cyberspace?
I'm not a booster, but I'm just saying if you try to look at it from Beijing's perspective, it doesn't look like it's really hurting them that much.
You disagree?
I disagree.
On China, Saturday on CNN.
All roads are barricaded. Let me push you once more on this because this is important. What is the women's role in the UAE?
Connect the world with Becky Anderson, Sunday to Thursday on CNN.
Those negotiating on behalf of Iran are not going to be able to sign any nuclear deal without the backing of these people. Many Iranians want better relations with America, especially for this country's economic development. The lifting of the sanctions wouldn't only help Iranian firms, it would also open this country up to investment from outside.
to make a difference as a journalist by telling the truth of what's going on. Hala Garani, CNN, we bring you the news through the eyes, through the opinions, through the vantage points of everyone who's a part of the story. Over the years, I've had the privilege and the opportunity to see people who are acting in extraordinary ways during extraordinary circumstances. They've been running gun battles. And that's an amazing to history. When you speak to a person directly affected, that is when you complete your understanding of the news. All of our journalists on the ground, our analysts in the studio, will take the viewers on that journey. It's topical, it's daily, it tells you everything you need to know in 1 hour. That is The World Right Now.
The World Right Now with Hala Garani. Tonight on CNN.
I'm Will Ripley in Tokyo, and this is CNN.
We'll get back to our coverage of the deliberate downing of Flight 9525 in a few moments, but I want to turn to another important development that's unfolding right now, this one in Yemen. Saudi Arabia now leading a major military coalition against rebel forces in Yemen, launching airstrikes against the Iranian-backed Shiite Houthi fighters in the capital of Sana'a. They're also planning to send in as many as 5,000 ground forces in the coming days. The Saudis, they're leading this coalition of mostly Gulf Arab states, although they're getting support from Egypt and Jordan as well. United States Secretary of State John Kerry spoke with his counterparts in the Gulf states today. He told them that the United States supports their efforts and will provide what's described as logistical and intelligence support to this major Saudi-led military move. These moves come after the elected president was forced to flee his palace in southern Yemen when rebel forces swarmed the area. President Hadi is now in the Saudi Arabian capital of Riyadh. Here's a breakdown of the battling groups in Yemen, by the way. The elected government took over after Arab Spring demonstrations led to the departure of the then President Ali Abdullah Saleh. The Iranian-backed Houthi rebels were once confined to parts northwest of Yemen, but now they have joined forces with army units still loyal supposedly to the former president. And then there's Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP. That's a key regional terror group that wants to launch attacks against the United States, especially in the U.S. homeland. Add to that a growing ISIS presence that's now been detected in Yemen, and this is clearly an unstable stew. It's a mess, to put it bluntly. Let's bring in the Texas Republican Congressman Mike McCaul. He's chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee. I want to get your quick reaction, first of all, Congressman, to what Evan Perez, our justice reporter, reported, the arrests of 2 more Americans, including 1 U.S. Army National Guard reservist, if you will, apparently seeking to go off to Egypt and then head over to Syria to hook up with ISIS. What do you make of this?
Well, it's very disturbing to see our National Guardsmen going to join the enemy in Syria, and his cousin at the same time plotting to attack a military base in the United States. We have that ISIS kill list that's been out there. And remember, just last week, U.S. Air Force veteran Pugh was arrested for trying to go join the enemy and ISIS in Syria as well. So this strange development of our U.S. military personnel wanting to join ISIS is extremely disturbing. The good news is the FBI and Homeland Security officials have been able to detect and disrupt and stop these potential plots.
I know you and other Homeland Security experts here in the United States, you're really worried about AQAP in Yemen, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, given their track record in wanting to attack targets right here in the U.S. What's going on in Yemen right now, how does that affect the U.S. ability to deal with these kinds of terror threats that emanate from inside Yemen?
Remember, the administration called Yemen a model of counterterrorism policy, and I think that model has failed and imploded. Now we're seeing what we're seeing right now, where the Shia militants have really tried to take over Yemen, AQAP running with impunity. I think, actually, Wolf, this development of the Saudis in collaboration with 9 other Arab nations to go in and try to stabilize and take out this threat is a very positive development. And what I think is, it could be a real model for counterterrorism in the region, particularly against ISIS as we look forward. But make no mistake, the reason why the Saudis are going into Yemen, it's right in their backyard, but also because it's the Shia militant, that's Iran, in their backyard, not because of AQAP. So I think, again, it's a positive development if they can stabilize the region. But the threat to the homeland is very clear that AQAP, the premier bomb-making, premier external operation force in the Middle East, is running free without any ability on our part to monitor. If the Arab nations can go in and stabilize this, then perhaps we can have greater monitoring on the ground, intelligence capability, intelligence footprint, which we're lacking right now.
And I think you're right. I think the Saudis, backed by the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait and Qatar and Egypt, Jordan, all these other Arab states, their real concern right now is that Iran, that they see as a bitter rival right now, will have this foothold right on the Arabian Peninsula. Isn't that right?
Well, that's exactly right. And they're also concerned about the presence of Iran in Iraq and possibly in Syria as well, which is why we're having a hard time getting their support against ISIS as we speak. But, you know, Yemen, if you look at the map, it's right south of Saudi Arabia, and it's in that peninsula. And so they are very concerned about the presence of Shia militants, Iran, in their own backyard. That's why for the first time, they're finally standing up and acting and protecting their own backyard, which I think, again, is a positive step, that if we could look at that model of cooperation of Arab, Sunni nations against Sunni extremists, and also Shia militants, and have them provide the ground force while we provide a lot of the air support and special forces to wipe out and destroy these terrorists.
I'm sure you've seen those reports, Mr. Chairman, that the U.S. left behind in Yemen for what were once considered friendly Yemeni militaries about $500 million, $500 million worth of military equipment at various air bases, including in Sana'a, the capital, and a lot of that military equipment now in the hands of these Houthi Shiite pro-Iranian rebels, or maybe in the hands of AQAP, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. How worried are you about this development?
Well, I'm very worried because this failure of foreign policy has now turned over a lot of our capability to the enemy. And we saw the same thing happen in Iraq when the ISIS forces went into Mosul and took over. The Iraqi army folded and they took over a lot of our hardware and technology. Same thing has happened in Yemen. That kind of capability turned against us, particularly AQAP, that's intent, hell-bent on attacking the West and the United States particularly. Could be a very dangerous situation to the homeland.
Mike McCall is the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee. Mr. Chairman, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Wolf. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And this note to our viewers, later today, the Saudi ambassador to the United States, Adel El-Jubeir, will be my guest in the Situation Room. That's coming up 5 p.m. Eastern. Adel El-Jubeir, the Saudi ambassador to the U.S., he announced this Saudi military move into Yemen last night. We'll talk about what's going on. Still ahead, we'll get back to our other top story, a heartbreaking trip for the families of those killed in Flight 9525. Their journey to the crash site made so much more difficult after learning their loved ones died because of the co-pilot's deliberate acts. We're going to have a live report. That's coming up.
When you witness war, division, and see the firsthand, when you face the reality of famine, genocide, and natural disaster, you can't help but be affected. But these experiences are important. They give us knowledge. They give us no choice but to ask questions. especially the ones people don't want to answer. This is a pretty shocking picture. Would you condemn President Assad for 100,000 plus deaths? These experiences don't just make it possible for us to know where the story might go. They demand that we go with it.
Every country has an identity, a history, customs, culture. A unique landscape that determines how its people live, work, and play. Now get an insider's look with CNN's On the Road. From recovering an ancient heritage to the next generation of IT education. Join us as we explore Armenia. CNN On the Road, Armenia, Saturday on CNN, in association with Corporación America.
I'm Laura Baldessera in Atlanta, and this is CNN.
Updating the breaking news this hour, officials now say it appears the co-pilot of Germanwings Flight 9525 crashed the plane deliberately. That conclusion based on information from the plane's cockpit voice recorder. The French prosecutor says after the captain left the cockpit, the co-pilot refused to let him back in, even when he was banging on the door, screaming, "Let me in." He also says the co-pilot initiated the plane's descent from 38,000 feet, to 6,000 feet. The prosecutor says all that was done on purpose by the co-pilot. Those shocking revelations coming as grieving friends and families go on an emotional trip near the crash site in the French Alps. Our own Carl Penhall is joining us on the phone right now. He's near where the families have gathered. Carl, how did the families hear this terrible news today that the co-pilot took that plane down deliberately?
Well, it was the French prosecutor himself, Brice Robin, who met those families as they arrived in Marseille airport. At least two flights had come in, one from Dusseldorf, the other from Barcelona, bringing relatives from the German side and from the Spanish side. And before the French prosecutor met the press, he received up to over 200 relatives and told them the news first. He said he owed it to them to keep them up to date with every new detail. Of course, the French prosecutor was under pressure to give out as much detail as he could after leaks overnight in the news media gave away some of the details, at least, of the explosive new material. And when he said he broke that news to relatives, he said that many of them expressed disbelief. He said that they did not have the words to express their surprise that this investigation had taken this kind of turn. He said then he was bombarded by multiple questions, asking technical questions and asking legal questions as well. Families trying to come to terms with just how this could have happened. And then, of course, the reaction from the press as he then went and dropped this bombshell publicly, well, even among the press, dropped jaws and shaking heads. Many just could not believe the explosive remarks that the prosecutor was making, Wolf.
It was amazing as we were watching it live right here on CNN. Do we have an update, Carl, on the teams that are scouring the mountainside right now, looking for the remains of the people who were on board that plane?
Yes, absolutely. Again, the prosecutor going into quite a lot of detail about that. First of all, he said that the recovery of the bodies had begun yesterday afternoon. He also went on to say that because of the speed that the aircraft hit the ground, death would have been instantaneous. And of course, we already know that they're not necessarily looking for whole bodies, but body parts. And on that, the prosecutor had some strong words. He said recovery teams were recovering remains bit by bit, one by one, and bag by bag. And as that recovery is done, then those body parts are loaded onto a stretcher. They're taken to a morgue area on the side of the mountain, and that is where the process of formal identification and declaration of death is done. What he also said, describing the area as very dangerous and very mountainous, said that investigators were working in teams of 2, accompanied by experienced mountain guides. That enabled many teams to fan out across the mountainside, and they were looking and marking any spots where they found body parts or significant parts of the plane as well. But he said it was a task that is going to take a long time. At one point in that press conference, he said recovering all the bodies could take several weeks. He then went on and gave a little bit more precision and said perhaps by the end of next week or by the end of the following week, most of the recovery of bodies could be complete, Wolf.
Yeah, and the French prosecutor with those chilling words that the cockpit voice recorder in the final seconds before the plane crashed into the French Alps said they could hear people screaming inside that plane, inside that cabin. All right, Carl, we'll check back with you. Very chilling information. Coming up much more on this deliberate crash in the French Alps. We're going to also be answering your questions. Our panel of experts are here. Stay with us.
Nothing need endure this kind of torture, they say. But we do it anyway. No one can go further. It's impossible to journey that deep. But we do it anyway. Maybe, just maybe, they're right. No one will ever test a Rolex like Rolex. But we do it anyway. The Rolex way.
In real estate, every square meter counts, whether it's a trendy container home, a villa facing the sea, or a new development in an emerging market. What makes a property the next hot address? Every week on 1 Square Meter, we go to every corner of the globe, from hot properties to hot spots, to see where developers are moving in, so investors can prosper.
1 Square Meter, Tuesday in Connect the World, in association with MR.
It begins with a spark, a eureka moment. Join me and meet the great inventors of our time. Ingenious products, break.
Join us for Make, Create, Innovate in Quest Means Business.
want to make a difference as a journalist by telling the truth of what's going on. Hala Garani, CNN, we bring you the news through the eyes, through the opinions, through the vantage points of everyone who's a part of the story. Over the years, I've had the privilege and the opportunity to see people who are acting in extraordinary ways during extraordinary circumstances. I've been running gun battles, and that's an amazing front seat to history. This is just a completely surreal experience. To speak to a person directly affected, that is when you complete your understanding of the news. All of our journalists on the ground, our analysts in the studio, will take the viewers on that journey with us. It's topical, it's daily, it tells you everything you need to know in 1 hour. That is the world right now.
The World Right Now with Hala Garani. Tonight on CNN.
I'm George Howell. This is CNN.
Throughout the morning and into the afternoon, we've been asking viewers here in the United States and around the world to submit their questions about the crash on Twitter. To answer them, let's bring back our panel. CNN aviation analyst Peter Goals, our law enforcement analyst Tom Fuentes in London, our aviation analyst Les Abend, and in Atlanta, our senior medical correspondent Elizabeth Cohen. Peter, let's get right to the first question. Shelby Knight asks, does the rate of descent tell you anything? If co-pilot was determined to crash, why set so slow?
Well, that's a little bit of a question mark, but he did set it at a rather sedate decline, and we don't know.
Because they could have gone down if he wanted to. 8 minutes it took them to descend from 38,000 feet
That's right.
and crash 6,000 feet into the Alps, but they could have done it more quickly. Good question from Shelby. Miranda Woods asks, Tom, why don't we have live cameras on planes so when we detect something wrong, we can help the innocent and take over and help?
Well, that's a great question, and it's because I think the pilots don't want it, the airlines haven't wanted it. You know, everybody's clamoring for the police to have cameras on, but I don't even know one cop that shot 149 people at one time.
Yeah, they should have streaming of what's going on inside the cockpit and what's inside those cockpit voice recorders and the flight data recorders. That could be live, sent to someplace. We got the technology, they just have to do it. Les, a question for you from Bob. Why is the second black box, this is for you, Les, so hard to find if it's pinging like it's supposed to? Could the pinger be damaged?
Well, the pinger is used primarily for underwater situations. So in this particular circumstance, it would have been the emergency locator transmitter because of the impact with the ground. But back to the camera situation, that wasn't going to help this airplane. Having a camera in the cockpit, there was nobody else that could intervene but the crew members, and that's kind of why we're not really in favor of it, because it doesn't really add to safety.
Yeah,
but that's
it
my
might give us
opinion on
it might give us all a better explanation of what went wrong, and as a result, you learn from those lessons and avoid those mistakes down the road. That's the other side of the argument.
True.
All right, let me get another question in for Elizabeth Cohen. Lorelei asks, is it not possible that the co-pilot was medically unconscious? Elizabeth.
Wolf, I think a lot of people are wondering this, and what the authorities say is that the co-pilot deliberately manipulated the buttons in order to make that descent, and they say that action, quote, can only be voluntary. In other words, they're saying you can't do that if you're medically unconscious.
Peter, a question from Jimmy Saris. New cars can stop themselves before a crash. Why isn't there technology to prevent a plane from landing anywhere but the runway?
Well, we've seen there's been great advances in the use of drones. There's questions about pilotless planes, particularly on cargo flights. But I think we're a good decade away from any of that technology being even testable in the air.
Here's a question for you, Tom. This is a question. Is there a possibility the plane was hacked and that the co-pilot was framed?
Well, I think the problem with that is that you couldn't hack the door to be locked. You couldn't hack to keep the pilot out. And so, you know, and then as far as deliberately changing the trajectory of the plane to go down and fly into that mountain, I don't see how you could hack that or how you could prevent that from being undone if the co-pilot didn't want that to happen.
Here's a question for you, Les. This is from Michelle. Plane was presumably full of fuel. Why wasn't there a fiery explosion upon impact? Does wreckage show any burn marks?
Initially, it looked like there were some smoke, and but the airplane just literally almost disintegrated. The fuel didn't have time to burn. It impacted with terrain so quickly.
Here's a question for you, Elizabeth. This is from Jody. What about under the influence of medication or other? Question for you, Les.
I can't speak for the European carriers, but I can speak for the United States, and we do random screening at this point in time. It's gone off quite a bit. We used to do it almost all the time at the end of the trip, but it's random screening at this point, alcohol and drugs.
Peter Golds, here's a question for B. Wolf. It's a serious question. Where do we go from here?
Well, I think this is going to be a wake-up call, particularly on the medical and psychological screening area. As our correspondent indicated, oftentimes they go to family doctors to get their screening. It's got to become more sophisticated. It's got to become more independent.
Yeah, and this, as you pointed out to me, what we've learning now could potentially be a game changer in what's going on, and we're going to have a lot more coming up later today in the Situation Room as well throughout the day here on CNN. I'll be back 5 p.m. Eastern in the Situation Room. Much more on the breaking news. Once again, the Saudi ambassador to the U.S. will be joining us as well. CNN News Center coming up for our international viewers. For our viewers in North America, Newsroom with Brooke Baldwin starts right now.
Tragedy goes from horrible to unthinkable. Investigated the Germanwings 95 deliberate. For authorities, the search is on for a motive as some family members try to find their own answers in a small town in France very near to where their loved ones died. A special edition of CNN News Center starts right now.
Hello everyone, I'm Aisha Sasay. The picture of what happened to Germanwings Flight 9525 is coming into focus. Audio recordings point to an intentional crash at the hands of the co-pilot. Here's what we know right now. The co-pilot, who is now being blamed for Tuesday's crash in the Alps, has been identified. That man you see there on your screens, he was a 28-year-old German national named Andreas Lubitz. Investigators used black box audio files to reconstruct what happened. They say the pilot left the cockpit, perhaps to use the restroom, and then co-pilot Lubitz locked him out and set a course for descent. For several minutes, there was only the sound of his breathing while the pilot tried to get back in, growing more frantic with each attempt, while ground control also tried to make contact. Families of the victims today made a difficult journey. They traveled as close as they could get to the scene of the crash. They were accompanied by Red Cross workers and counselors on their flight. Well, at this point in time, the victims are the main concern of Germanwings and their parent company, Lufthansa. CNN senior international correspondent Fred Pleitgen sat down with Lufthansa's CEO for an exclusive interview and asked him how he broke the news to the victims' families that the crash was deliberate.
After this new information came out, how did you tell the relatives of those who were killed?
Well, the relatives have been in our focus for the last 2 days after this terrible accident, and in these, for sure, darkest hours in the history of our group, we have tried as much as we can to take care of them. We sent counselors, we tried to be with them all around the clock, and we also today managed to get the information to them before they found out from the media, which I think is a sign of respect, which is highly appreciated and required.
How do you explain what happened? I mean, it seems like something that seems so out of the question. How do you explain that something like this could happen on a pilot that was trained in your company and flew for your company?
To tell you the truth, we have no explanation at this point. We in Lufthansa have been for decades so proud of selecting the best people to become pilots, training them in the best way, having them qualified in the best way. That something of this kind would ever happen to us is incomprehensible. And I think we just need to understand this is a single case which every safety system in the world cannot completely rule out. And I think that's what we take as an explanation, if you want to call it that.
But might there have been signs? Could there have been indications that this person might have been mentally unstable?
No, the pilot has passed all his tests, all his medical exams. We have at Lufthansa a reporting system where crew can report without being punished their own problems, or they can report about problems of others without any kind of punishment. That hasn't been used either in this case. So all the safety nets we are so proud of here have not worked in this case.
How much information have you gathered about the co-pilot, about Andreas Lubitz? How much information do you have, and how are you trying to assess it?
Well, by German law, we won't answer this one. But of course, we are looking into things. And of course, even this is just a single case, we will now go back and see what we can do to even improve our system further. Because for Lufthansa, safety has always been number one. And that's why we do our utmost to bring it even to a higher level after this terrible accident.
That's of course, another important question. Were there possibly flaws in the evaluation process? I know that you've been doing it for a very long time. I know that the process is very rigorous, and it also puts cadets under stress situations. But might there be things that need to improve to assess the mental stability of people who want to fly in your cockpits?
But again, this has been a terrible single case, and we have had decades of selecting pilots, training pilots in our schools in northern Germany, in Phoenix, Arizona, qualifying people for all different airplanes up to the 620 we have now. So I think we will take this back and look for even more better ideas and improvements, but that's going to take some time. And this, again, we should not rule from this single case that a system which has worked for so many decades is not as close to perfect as it can be.
How big a blow is this, not just for your airline, but also for the credibility of the airline? Because people fly Lufthansa because they feel that they're in good hands. They feel that the airplanes are very well maintained and that the pilots have the best training and are very professional.
Well, all these reasons to fly Lufthansa are still valid after this terrible accident. We are putting safety at number one in Lufthansa, in training, in maintenance. Whenever it takes, we do what we need to do for improving our safety level even further. So I think, again, after this terrible accident, maybe feelings have somewhat been changed and touched, but our professional commitment has not changed a single bit. And we'll keep it up. I promise this to anybody who has chosen.
But you'll understand that people might feel uneasy now at this stage.
Again,
getting on one of your airplanes.
Of course, we understand emotions after this terrible accident, but for us as professionals, we need to ensure that the safety focus of Lufthansa is in no way touched. And I promise you it's not, and we will do our very, very best to even improve it further.
In the United States, for instance, if one of the crew members leaves the cockpit, there always has to be someone who goes in, a flight attendant or something. Why was the co-pilot allowed to be in the cockpit alone?
Also in the United States, to my knowledge, that's only true for very few airlines. Most airlines around the world follow the same procedures as Lufthansa, that in flight phases with low workload, a pilot can leave the cockpit, especially for physical need, and then he returns to the cockpit as fast as he can. So that's the global, I think, most accepted procedure, which we have used in Lufthansa for many, many years. And I think we look at that as well. But we should not put the whole SIF system at stake just because of this terrible single accident.
But do you think you're going to make changes to it?
We'll take our time and to look into that with our own experts, with experts from the authorities, with experts from other airlines, I'm sure.
What do you know about what exactly happened? Because I know that some of it you've said that apparently the captain was locked out of the cockpit. What do you know about what exactly happened afterwards?
Well, we just know the same thing the public knows from the press statements of the French investigation office, where apparently after the captain has left the cockpit, he tried to regain access, where there were knocks on the doors, according to the French authorities, and the door was either kept locked or not opened in the way it was supposed to be. And that for sure is a clear indication that the remaining pilot, the co-pilot, didn't want the captain to return.
So there's no indication, because we've been talking about there might have been a medical emergency, there might have been some other event that could have caused the pilot to become incapacitated. You believe that the co-pilot deliberately steered the plane into the mountain?
Well, we do have a safety procedure in place in case the remaining pilot gets unconsciousness. There is a way to open the door from the outside unless the person in the inside blocks it. And this apparently has happened here.
So he blocked it from the inside as the pilot, the captain, was trying to get back in?
From what we know, he didn't allow access to the cockpit. It's exactly what the French authorities have so far informed us about.
What did the captain try to do to get back in? Is there a possibility to knock a door down at this stage of the game?
After the terrible 9/11 accidents, we have put in Lufthansa, like most other airlines, doors into our cockpits which are not to be broken by manual force. They're not even to be opened with small weapons. So there was no way to get back to the cockpit for the captain in this case when the co-pilot was not allowing that access.
How do you break something like this to the relatives of the victims? Because I mean, for now, they were grieving. It was obviously awful for them, but now there has to be a certain degree of anger as well.
Well, again, we have trained psychologists, people who have done this before, people who do this in a professional way, supported, of course, by people from Lufthansa. But I think it's imprehendable to comfort those who lost somebody they loved 2 days ago. But we do our very best.
A catastrophic event like this one can always pose an existential threat to an airline. Now, we know that obviously Lufthansa is one of the biggest airlines in the world, one of the most robust airlines in the world. But could there be changes ahead because of this?
Well, I think Lufthansa has built up credibility over 60 years now. And again, this terrible accident is in no way something I want to play down in its importance. It's terrible.
But what about Germanwings, for instance?
It has been affected, but I think the credibility of our group, the way we operate airplanes, the way we train our people, will allow us to get through this and maintain our credibility.
Lufthansa CEO speaking to our own Fred Pleitgen there. Still, he himself just trying to digest the magnitude of all that has emerged today. You are watching CNN News Center. Coming up, investigators have revealed staggering details about the last moments in the cockpit of Germanwings Flight 9525. Plus, we will go live to the crash recovery staging area in a moment.
Every country has an identity, a history, customs, culture. A unique landscape that determines how its people live, work, and play. Now get an insider's look with CNN's On the Road. From recovering an ancient heritage to the next generation of IT education. Join us as we explore Armenia. CNN On the Road, Armenia, Saturday on CNN, in association with Corporación America.
The number of billionaires in the world has more than doubled in the last 5 years. There's more ideas, more opportunities. It's created more wealth, just not for all. As the economic gaps widened, the issue is, are you getting your fair share? The business world has many options, so we'll sift through the jargon, making you better informed, ready to get your slice of the pie.
Negotiating on behalf of Iran are not going to be able to sign any nuclear deal without the backing of these people. Many Iranians want better relations with America, especially for this country's economic development. The lifting of the sanctions wouldn't only help Iranian firms, it would also open this country up to investment from outside.
It's called the Great Firewall.
Exactly what is not permitted online in China?
One thing that's accepted 1 month, next month it's a taboo subject.
This month on China, internet censorship.
The ambiguity is by design, not by accident.
Why does Beijing keep such a tight grip on cyberspace?
I'm not a booster, but I'm just saying if you try and look at it from Beijing's perspective, it doesn't look like it's really hurting them that much.
You disagree?
I disagree.
On China, Saturday on CNN.
The Germanwings Alps is truly a global tragedy. It affected 150 families in 18 different countries. Relatives of the victims arrived today in France to grieve, just hours after learning this may not have been an accident. Nick Robertson has been watching the emotional scenes play out near the crash site. He joins me now live from La Vernay, France. Nick, an opportunity for these family members today to be as close as possible to where their loved ones lost their lives, and there's already a memorial erected.
Aisha, there is. There were 7 coaches, large 50-seater coaches arrived here, and in the field behind me there's a memorial, and a memorial service was held. I'll just step out of the way and you can get to see the field, but the memorial service was held here. The families were able to see, surrounded by emergency workers, also doctors, medics, care workers there to help them with their grief. And they were able to walk one at a time or in groups up to the memorial itself. The memorial, upon it, we're told, was engraved the names of all of the people on board the aircraft. They were perhaps able to go up and read the name of their loved one. We also know, standing here watching them as they stood there for over an hour, if they were able to look up into the mountains above them and around them, they will have been able to see the snow-capped peaks, the craggy skyline. And if you look deep into the mountains, where Christian's turning the camera right now, you can see a ridgeline. You can see a couple of ridgelines. Deep down below that ridgeline is where the helicopters have been flying into. The families will have been able to see the helicopters going up there today. They will have been able to see that very difficult and tough terrain that the helicopters have been going to every day to winch down the recovery workers, winch them back up at the end of the day. The process has been going on throughout the day. At one moment we've seen a helicopter come up with something slung beneath it. The families, however, having to grapple with the grief, with the knowledge from the prosecutor that their family members, their loved ones, would have known what was happening in the last moments. There were screams heard aboard the aircraft. No answers for them today. And also the prosecutor said the recovery effort going on, but it may take several weeks before they're able to repatriate the victims of this crash.
Yeah, it is such a horror, so much pain that these people are going through. Nick Robertson joining us there from La Vernay, France. Nick, thank you. Well, as we've been reporting today, French prosecutors say moments before the plane crashed, the captain was locked out of the cockpit as his co-pilot made that fateful descent. CNN aviation correspondent Richard Quest joins me now from New York with more on that astonishing detail amongst many. Richard, today's revelations by the Marseille public prosecutor, nothing short of staggering. Of course, no one can know exactly what was going through this co-pilot's mind, but let me ask you this. Given what we know about the sequence of events at this point, does this strike you as a crime of opportunity or something pre-planned?
Well, that's a very, very good question. We don't know. According to the prosecutor, he took his moment of opportunity when the captain left the cockpit. And also, according to the prosecutor, in the briefing earlier in the flight, when they had been talking about the checklist for going into land in Dusseldorf, the co-pilot had started to answer in very short answers. He was not being very responsive, almost as if he knew they were never going to get to Dusseldorf, so why bother with the checklist for the arrival at the airport. That said, you've got to work out, how did he get the captain out of the cockpit? Did he know that the captain would like to take a restroom break once the plane got to the altitude? Did he sort of suggest to him that now might be a good moment if he wished captain to leave the flight deck? Now would be good. We don't know. Putting it together, Aisha, it strikes me, listening to what we've heard, that there was an opportunistic moment to carry out that which he intended to do. It doesn't sound like it was spur of the moment.
To just pick up on something you said, could it possibly have been that he knew that the captain would want to take a bathroom break? How are pilots typically paired together?
Oh, purely, I mean, pilots can request to fly together, depends on the airline. So the US carriers do it by a bidding system based on seniority. The European airlines do it on the basis of they're told where they're going to fly. You can request a certain number of particular designated flights each month. Different airlines do it different ways. So yes, you can request to. Germanwings is not a large airline, so it's highly likely that these two men had flown together at some point, except that the first officer was quite new. He'd only been there for 18 months or 2 years. So pure luck in some cases, but yes, you can request to. It just depends on the airline's policy.
Okay, let's talk about the fact that the co-pilot was left alone in the cockpit. It is the focus of much conversation on this day. And let's talk about this two-person protocol, which is in operation here in the US. How is this not standard global aviation industry procedure?
Because under the ICAO procedures, that's the UN body that rules on matters of aviation, under ICAO, you have to reach a consensus. ICAO does nothing by fiat or diktat, and it's never going to get a consensus on that, and they've not been able to. And indeed, post 9/11 and more recently, post MH370, there has been no consensus on it because some airlines after 370 said, yes, we will go to a two-man or two-person rule. In this case, Lufthansa's CEO said they didn't have such a rule. I can tell you, in the last 5 hours, we've already heard from Norwegian and we've heard from EasyJet, both of whom saying they are now going to a two-person rule. When one leaves the cockpit, another member of crew has to go in. I find it inconceivable, post this incident, that all airlines will not move to a two-person rule. Not because it's a guarantee against somebody doing this, but because it is further protection against somebody doing it. And also, let's put the situation where one leaves and the other has a heart attack. In that situation, there would be somebody in the cockpit who can open the door. And in the case of somebody trying to do an attack in the cockpit or somebody trying to take down the plane, well, the other person, all they have to do is open the door.
Yeah, change is coming. It has to, in light of what has happened here. Richard Quest joining us there from New York. Always appreciate it, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're watching CNN News Center. Coming up, regional tensions heat up in the Arabian Peninsula as Saudi Arabia leads airstrikes against Shiite Houthi rebels in Yemen. We will look at the forces involved and the roots of the conflict. Do stay with us.
Dubai is a very exciting place for architects. This is a metropolis that didn't exist 50 years ago. But it's a city that is showing us how the future might look. The Burj Khalifa is a groundbreaking piece of architecture because it destroys all our preconceptions of what a building is. What does it feel like? How do they do it? How is it possible? It's a building that tests our understanding of space and time. Anything is possible. That's what I find inspiring about Dubai. There are no limits.
Innovators, influencers, they've reached the top and are today's leading women, inspiring individuals, sharing their insights on CNN this month.
You're a mom, you're a daughter, you're a media executive, you're running a company, and you have to give your 100% to each one of all of that. So is that possible?
Two single mothers who've made it to the top share the realities of being a working woman. Leading Women, Saturday on CNN.
Hello, everyone. We'll have more on the investigation into the crash of Germanwings 9525 later on in the program. But right now, I want to bring you some of the day's other top stories. News reports say Saudi Arabia has carried out more airstrikes against Shiite Houthi rebels in Yemen Thursday, targeting a military base in the city of Tez. It was already threatening to send ground troops into Yemen after leading an early round of strikes. Saudi Arabia is the world's top oil exporter and shares a long border with Yemen. And the rising tensions are raising fears of a broader sectarian conflict in the Middle East. Now, you can see the damage from the airstrikes in this video here on your screens. The Saudis view the Houthis as proxies for the Shiite government of Iran, which is in turn slamming the Saudi intervention. The deposed Yemeni president is said to be heading for an Arab summit in Egypt under Saudi protection. Well, the U.S. didn't take part in the Saudi-led airstrikes, but administration officials say Washington supports the military action. Here's what the White House press secretary told CNN just a short time ago.
What we have done as of last night is Saudi Arabia was a close partner of the United States, has understandably decided to take military action because they share a long border in the south with Yemen, and they are concerned about that destabilizing activity on their border. And the United States, at the request of the Saudis and their partners in this effort, has stepped in to offer some military support, including some intelligence.
All right, let's get a sense of what's going on in Yemen now. I want to bring in Hakeem Al-Masmari for that. He is the editor-in-chief of the Yemen Post. He joins us now by phone from the Yemeni capital of Sana'a. Thank you so much for joining us, Hakeem. Saudis have launched these airstrikes. Describe for us the situation there in Sana'a throughout the day, what you've been seeing and hearing.
Early morning today, there were hundreds of airstrikes on military and strategic locations in Sana'a and other provinces by Saudi Arabia. Started 3 a.m. in the morning. This resulted throughout the day in Sana'a has been almost like a ghost town, Aisha, with very rarely do you see civilians or children walking in the streets. Right now, the Houthi supreme leader just gave a speech, and he also is escalating and threatening to escalate even more if Saudi Arabia does not stop these airstrikes. We're seeing the beginning of a long-term proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, but this time the location is Yemen and not Syria.
Yeah, and that is a major concern for many. We're looking at pictures now on our screens of destruction caused by these airstrikes. What can you tell us about the target of these Saudi airstrikes? And I know that the Houthis are promising a response, a reaction, but what impact is it having on their activity right now?
Very clear and strategic targets by Saudi Arabia. They are targeting the Houthi strategic military base, whether it is weapon storages, missile storages, the airport's runways, to ensure all these attacks are only to ensure that the Houthis are not capable to attack Saudi Arabia if this war continues. The Houthis right now are calling for fronts and people to announce jihad against Saudi Arabia, and if not, these attacks, if they continue, we do expect the Houthis to enter Saudi Arabia or to start invading Saudi Arabia within the end of the week. Right now, it's very tense. The missile attacks, the airstrikes are continuing as we talk right now in Sana'a. But again, as of now, all civilian deaths are limited, and the attacks have been targeted only on, or mainly on, military strategic areas and headquarters that are being held right now by the Houthis.
So, Hakeem, just so I'm clear on what you're saying, the airstrikes are continuing right now as we're having this conversation. You can hear them?
I can hear them right now as they take place. We are now blacked out in Sana'a. Over the last couple of hours, we have no electricity. This is why we're doing a phone or not a Skype interview. But again, right now, as we talk, we can hear the airstrikes and also the anti-missile aircraft. Missiles here, so it's both ways. The Houthis want to ensure that any Saudi airstrike does not succeed, and that is why most of the airstrikes are happening at night, because the Saudis know that Yemenis have low capabilities to stop their missiles during nighttime, and not able to do that.
Well, it's clearly an extremely tense time there in the capital of Yemen, Sana'a. Hakeem Al-Masmari, editor-in-chief of the Yemen Post, thank you so much for joining us and just giving us a sense of what is happening on the ground right now. We very much appreciate it. Do stay safe. If you're just joining us, Hakeem Al-Masmari saying that as he spoke to us here at CNN, he could hear those Saudi airstrikes taking place in and around him there in the Yemeni capital, Sana'a. Well, U.S.-led allies conducted airstrikes against ISIS militants in Tikrit, Iraq overnight in support of the Iraqi government offensive to capture the town. The U.S. military says 17 strikes hit targets including bridges, checkpoints and militant staging areas. France announced that it took part in the bombing raids, and the Pentagon says they will continue. Tikrit fell to the militants in June, and the latest Iraqi offensive to retake it has stalled. You're watching CNN News Center. Coming up, part of the investigation into the crash of Germanwings Flight 9525 is now focused on the apparently deliberate actions of the co-pilot. We will talk live with an aviation psychologist next.